This week on Dig Me Out. With your hosts, Jason Ziak and Tim Minichi.
Jay, we're back again with another episode thanks to our Dig Me Out Union on Patreon. You can help us make the next episode happen by joining us at dmounion.com or digmeoutunion.com. And Jay, speaking of our union, we have a returning union member who is flaunting his swag on the video. He's got the all-seeing eye shirt that we sent out, and one day we will press the button and the eyes will open up and we will reveal our plan to the universe.
We're taking over commercial radio.
Yes, we have purchased Clear Channel.
You'll only hear obscure music from the 90s.
There you
forever.
Go. Let's welcome back to the show, Mr. Patrick Testa. Patrick, how are you?
I'm doing well. How you guys doing?
Good.
Thanks for having me.
Not bad.
I'm excited.
Cool. Let's talk about the previous records that we have talked about with you. Going back to 2018, James and the album Laid, followed up with Anima by Tool, Choochtown, Hamel on Trial, Bombs and Butterflies, Widespread Panic, Burn to Shine, Ben Harper and the Innocent Criminals, and last year, Din of Ecstasy, Chris Whitley. So that's a good swath of different sounds and artists. And I knew that you would throw us another curveball, and I called my pitch correctly. So will you share with the audience what you have brought to the table for 2024?
Well, I picked 100 albums, as I usually do. And then had to figure out why I can't pick less than 100. But I eventually came down to importance. I think it's important to cover this artist, and I think she was important to the 90s in a unique way, and she embodies a lot the 90s artists did. So I whittled it down to Sinéad O'Connor, and I picked probably what might be considered probably her least successful record, maybe overall. But it was also the last record she did in the 90s, in 1994, the Universal Mother record from 1994.
That is right. This is her fourth album overall.
I think so.
And it would be 6 years before her follow-up Faith and Courage came out in 2000. Everybody knows Sinéad O'Connor, of course, from the iconic cover of Prince's Nothing Compares to You. That was released on the 1990 album I Do Not Want What I Haven't Got, which was the follow-up to her debut in 1987, The Lion and the Cobra. And then in between that, in 92, was Am I Not Your Girl? And then in the 2000s, she put out 5 more records. I cannot pronounce the one from 2002. It is in another language. Do you know how to pronounce that, Patrick? Because
isn't that the Theology record?
Yeah. It's traditional Irish songs.
Oh, so, I don't know that. It's
called
listen to that record.
It is Senos Nua, maybe is the pronunciation. I'm trying to do it justice, but that's me. And then in 2005, Throw Down Your Arms, 2007, Theology, 2012, How About I Be Me and You Be You, 2014, I'm Not Bossy, I'm the Boss, that's a great title. I like that title.
That's a great album too.
Jay,
Yes.
Obviously you're familiar with the cover of Prince's song. It was a huge single. It was everywhere
Yep.
for a period of time. Um, do you
It
have you gone in
was.
any Sinead O'Connor albums or anything like that?
I haven't. I remember, was it The Emperor's New Clothes? The single after that got played quite a bit too. And that's really it. I mean, I remember her that MTV, or I'm sorry, the Saturday Night Live appearance.
Mm-hmm.
Probably saw her live on award shows or something, but other than that, I haven't listened to any albums or heard any other singles after that sort of 92 point. How about you?
I knew a couple of singles just because stuff was on MTV. So I
Yeah.
remembered she does a song with MC Light on the Lion and the Cobra called "I Want Your Hands on Me," and I remember I think that was on MTV um, in like the late '80s. Obviously, nothing compares to you. I do remember the Emperor's New Clothes. I might have even heard Mandinka. I'm not sure, but I recognized it when I heard it and going back and listening. But other than that, like newer stuff, I have no familiarity with it, and I did not know this record at all. Um, and she had a lot of charting singles in the '90s with "I Do Not Want What I Have Not Got" and "Am I Not Your Girl." Those both had, you know, uh, two to three charting singles, and Lion and the
Well,
Cobra had three. So, and that's just she also was featured on other artists' songs that she worked with. Like, if I'm looking on her Wikipedia page, I mean, she worked with like The Edge and Ja Wobble from Pill, and Peter Gabriel and Willie Nelson and Shane McGowan, bunch of people in the '90s. And then she continued to do that. I know there's a song that she does with Massive Attack on the 100th Window album. Um, and there was a bunch of Christmas stuff that she's done too, which is just random. I think there's like a cover. She has Silent Night, and there's also one. Um,
She does the Silent Night, I believe, in Gaelic, or at least part of it's in Gaelic.
yeah, I remember it being different. But this album that we're going to be talking about, I had no familiarity. Did you get this when it came out? Was this something that you came to later?
Yeah, we got this when it came. Um, I had first probably not ever heard her before I saw her on when she performed. I think it was the Grammys, the first time or the only time she was on the Grammys. I think it was the Grammys. It was one of the award shows where
Mm-hmm.
she performed Mandinka. And that was the first time I saw her, and she had the shaved head. She had her first controversy was that night because she painted on the side of her head the Public Enemy logo in protest of the Grammys. I guess it was the Grammys, and the protest of the Grammys not really honoring hip hop artists at that time. And she was scary a little bit. It was like,
Mm-hmm.
and I was young, so I didn't know what to think. I don't know if it was my age, and or if it was the state of the world I was living in or the bubble I was in, whatever. But she came off as being something really out there, really alternative. And there were moments of just screaming and then back to beautiful singing, and it was jarring at the very least because I didn't know why she was so angry. I was young and listening to what was happening in the 80s, which was mostly party music that was allowed to be played on the radio at that time. And so, yeah, it was something to behold then. But I don't think I really, after that, it didn't like stick with me until she covered um, Nothing Compares to You. But even then, I don't think many people even knew it was a cover until
Right.
years later. Even it wasn't publicized anyway.
Right.
And and then the controversies. So when the other controversies came out, again, I was young enough to be like sometimes flippant about it or sometimes joking about it. But man, you look back on that stuff now and it's unbelievable how poorly she was treated through all that. And she was right in every instance. She was just doing what she was doing, you know? So I think that I don't know if it got to that point before I got this album or not, as far as me realizing what was happening in her career, but I did know about the controversies, and I kind of felt like she was maybe going to do a record that wasn't controversial at all, and trying to tame down everything for her career. But I'll tell you what really tripped me up to get this record was probably the song I think the song that came out before this was on the soundtrack to the Daniel Day-Lewis record or Daniel Day-Lewis movie, In the Name of the Father, which we saw in the
Mhm.
theaters, and that song was in the movie, and it blew us away. I'm like, oh my gosh, this is super powerful, and that song is fantastic. So I thought as soon as that record came out, I bought it, and so yeah, had it since '94.
So I'm sure people know, for the most part, Sinead O'Connor, the name. They might not know her entire history. She was born in Dublin, Ireland, December 1966. She passed away in London, England, in July of 2023 from natural causes. Um, or at least that's what the official report is. She had a very difficult life, and I think that's where a lot of the her outspokenness came from, is that she spoke up about the things that had affected her and she saw. And what's interesting, I think, about her is that she often would say things, especially when she was younger, that she would go back and say, look, I said that. I was a 20-year-old and I didn't really understand the situation as deeply as I do now. And I regret some of those comments. So she was someone who was willing to like analyze herself and say, I don't necessarily believe that way now because I was young and dumb, but there's a lot of things that she sparked conversations on, like so she 92 was when the Saturday Night Live appearance happened, but she was actually supposed to be on Saturday Night Live before that, and she was supposed to be the musical guest for Andrew Dice Clay,
Right.
Oh
and
my.
she was like no, and backed out because she didn't want to be associated with him. So
Yeah.
she had already um caught flack for that. Like Andrew Dice Clay went after her pretty heavily in I think even during that episode when he was on. I have to go look back to it, but um she was already outspoken, and like you know we forget this now, but there was like the whole situation with Northern Ireland, and U2 was involved with that, and she really went after U2, calling them like bombastic and not in a good way. And then years later was like, that wasn't right of me to do that. Like they were trying to help and I was being an obnoxious kid essentially. Um, but I remember the whole thing with Saturday Night Live. Like that was instant news when that happened. And also growing up in a Catholic family with going to Catholic school for 9 years, someone goes after the Catholic Church, you're like, oh, that's interesting.
Hmm.
Especially
Yeah,
when you're
and
not interested in that anymore.
right. Can I jump in here real
Yeah.
quick? Okay, so I just want to kind of clarify a little perspective on what you said, at least um my my opinion. Um a lot of the stuff that she went back and reanalyzed, I think she didn't really apologize for anything other than she never she would say things like she didn't realize how bad the reaction could get or where the reaction would morph in what it would morph into. Um a lot of the stuff that she said, she stood by for her whole life. Now maybe that
Mm-hmm.
the U2 thing, and maybe there's a couple of other political things that she might have changed her mind on or something, but as far as the big controversies, like the Saturday Night Live one and the the national anthem. That was another one where she was in New Jersey and didn't perform. Said she wouldn't perform if they played the national. Which she came on stage. I guess that's what they were going to do. They play the opening bands, and then before the headliner comes out, they were going to play the national anthem. And this, I think, is right after we invaded Iran or Iraq in 1991, and she said, "I don't want to do that. That's just not what I'm about." So they didn't play the national anthem, which ended up being huge day, and all the radio stations banned her, and then there was
Mhm.
people. There was the one iconic image of this guy with a steamroller steamrolling a bunch of her CDs, and he's saying, "I'm gonna scoop all these crumbs up and mail them to her," and that kind of stuff,
Right. There's always
and
idiots like that. Yeah.
getting banned on all kinds of radio.
I was just gonna say, like, what I was referring to is when she was talking about one of the things she was talking about was the provisional IRA, and she said, she said this was a quote. She was too young to understand the tense situation in Northern Ireland properly, and then later on, a lot of her, she was demonized, of course, for the whole thing that happened with Saturday Night Live and tearing up the picture of Pope John Paul. But she had to like sort of clarify that. She's like, I'm not anti-religion. I just opposed to the Catholic Church and their covering up of abuse and all that thing. She actually had said that if she hadn't become a singer, she actually wanted to become a priest.
She
and
did.
then and then if later in
to
life
that.
she converted to Muslim, she converted to Islam.
Real late though.
Real late, yes.
Yeah. But there's a reason for that too, and she gave
Sure.
a real good reason for that one.
Let's put all that aside because there's more you can unpack with her, but we should probably get to the record. We did get some comments over at Patreon. We'll get to the poll
Oh yeah.
later, but Ian McIver said this album follows her post SNL appearance and sees Sinead move away from the pop music of her previous albums to make music to express her emotions, namely anger at the status quo. The biggest problem is that it follows The Lion and the Cobra and I Do Not Want What I Haven't Got, both excellent albums. It's not to say this is a bad album, but one shouldn't go in with those expectations. The shift from those albums to Universal Mother causes the album to be a bit uneven as Sinead discovers the music she wants to make and the voice she wants to have free from the shackles of pop music expectations. A bit of refinement could have tightened up the album to worthy album, although who's going to say no to Sinead O'Connor? This is the album she wanted to present. But for now, the streak is broken. Better EP. Congratulations to Ian McIver. He breaks after 2 straight months of nothing but decent singles. He finally gets to a better EP. And the other comment was from Michael Jins. He said, Famine seems a little out of place with the rest of the songs. We'll talk about Famine as we talk about the record. But Jay, tell me what works for you on Universal Mother by Sinead O'Connor.
It's a pretty riveting vocal performance. I obviously from Nothing Compares to You, she's a powerhouse singer. Spending an entire album and the ups and downs, I got a better appreciation of exactly what she's doing. So, often in this record, her voice is delicate, ethereal almost, but there's still like a weight to it. It's really interesting in that way. And then she's able to pivot from that and sort of get into these almost defiant or, very emotional, expressive moments as well. And obviously through that whole, when the production's at its best, that voice is in the center. So you're being pulled through that journey and kind of hanging on every note she sings throughout this record. So I just really find that the way she sings, the way that she's even structuring some of these songs like Fire on Babylon and Red Football, where, they're building to these moments that are really dynamic. All Babies is another example, where you get this intensity, but it sort of, it earns it. And then I tend to like the stuff on here where the production is simpler. You know, the arrangements are more piano based or vocal harmonies and strings. And so there's some stuff on here that it almost borderlines like traditional Irish folk music. John, I Love You and Perfect Indian, I think, are good examples of that. Of like, you can hear the source melodies and ideas and stuff feeling very traditional. And I think that works really well for her voice. It allows it to be the star. So yeah, I think there's a really compelling singer here that is totally unique. And then there's a handful of songs on here as well where, you know, the production just lets that be the star and just lets that breathe, you know, and it can be very quiet at times. You know, there's a lot of tracks on here where the, you know, piano just kind of pushes back, or it's a simple presentation and you just are focused on the voice. I think that works really well. So what worked for you, Tim?
I really like the diversity of the record. I think it's real interesting that taking out the sample at the beginning, Jermaine, it's essentially bookended by two singles. Fire on Babylon and Thank You for Hearing Me were the two singles released. And then the middle part of the record, which is, you know, 3 through 13, again, minus the little Am I Human sample, which is, I believe, her son. It's essentially like this sort of, like you said, it's a much more subdued sound up until Famine, which is, I guess, an experimental hip hop track. But that song reminded me of something that, like, not in music sense, but in terms of its information. I actually learned something from listening to that song, and it reminded me of like listening to a Manic Street Preacher song or a Public Enemy song or something, where I'm like, huh, that's interesting. I need to go to look that up because I didn't know that information. There's a lot of that on this record where I hear her sing something and I go, what was that? What? I need to go look up what the lyrics are. I like that there's diversity because, for example, like Fire in Babylon, which has this like electronic reggae sound, I guess you would call it. When there's like a minute or so into the song, there's a pause, and then she sings Fire, and it sounds like the speakers are going to explode the way she sings it. It is so powerful. And then I knew it was like, okay, I like this record. Like as soon as I heard that, I was like, this she's phenomenal. as a singer. And you hear that in those big loud things that she does. But then also you get songs like In This Heart and Tiny Grief Song, which are these really gorgeous a cappella songs where she's either by herself or being backed by other voices. And it's such an interesting, transition, because you get this very produced. I think Fire in Babylon also has like a sample of a Miles Davis track and like a little bit of a horn sample. You get the full range with her. And that to me is like the thing that makes this such an interesting album. And it really works as an album in that sense, where it's taking you on this journey of these sort of weirdly connected tracks. There's there's a Nirvana cover on here, All Apologies, which she delivers in a very different way in terms of like the melodies there, the structures there, but the way that she sings it is almost unnerving. It's so intense. It's just her. I just think of that's just her. Like she is so in your face present that even a song that has what would you think of it, when I think of the Nirvana version, I think of that big fuzzy guitar line that dominates the song, and that's gone, and you get this. I don't know. I mean, I'm know there was a reason for her choosing that song. Clear. I mean, I'm guessing it was the lyrics, since that's really what it's stripped down to is the lyrics for the most part. I just think that this is such an interesting ride from beginning to end, and I can understand why it was not universally beloved when it came out, and it was maybe I don't know if it's the lowest selling album for a career, or if it's just, of the 90s or the first four or whatever. Because I don't know what the sales were for like the 2000s albums. That's a whole different animal when you're dealing with streaming and whatnot. But like I went through when I was looking at the Wikipedia page, like All Music gave this like a 3 out of 5, and LA Times gave it like a 2.5 out of 4. And so there was some, at the time there was some like middle of the road reviews, and then there were some positive reviews as well. Yeah, I can totally understand why that would happen, because this is a weird record, but I really enjoy the weirdness. It's also coming on the heels of listening to a lot of very loud, short punk metal stuff that we've been doing recently. So this was a complete, I mean, we just did a hardcore compilation album. We did the Hookers record, which was like a half hour of just like punk metal. There was stuff before that I'm forgetting, but like this was a complete 180, and it was kind of a welcome 180 in terms of just going in a different direction and hearing something new. So it quite captured my attention from the start. So Patrick, you brought the record to us. What works best for you on this record?
I'm going to be kind of lame here and say that, man, you covered pretty much everything that I think about the record. The diversity is a big thing for me. I don't know if I think I developed my own way of listening to music, and it requires diversity in some fashion. Like you said, when you come through the record as a full listen, and you go from one song like My Darling Child, and then you do hear that, the little 5-year-old or 3-year-old talking for 20 seconds, and then into Red Football, which starts off really soft and then builds into something monumental again, with a really cool, and at the time, hip sound. The sound on that song, and I would say Fire on Babylon, were kind of hip at the time.
Mm-hmm.
That ride is required listening for, or that type of thing in a album is required for me. I need to have diversity and thought-provoking things, and things that sound real and sometimes fade away and come back. And I guess I'm constantly thinking also when I listen to music. I have a real hard time just focusing in on just listening to music whenever I'm listening to music, even in concerts and even anytime, because I'm constantly thinking, or parts of songs make me, just like you said, and some of the lyrics make you think, oh, wait a minute, that's a piece of information. And then my brain goes and continues to think on that, or something tangential. I would say probably the first many years of listening to this record, we would listen to the first half more than the whole album. We'd put it on in the car and listen to the whole, put the CD on and listen to it until we were done driving, and typically would definitely get through All Apologies and maybe A Perfect Indian. And then, so I think the last 5 or 6 songs I really started to appreciate going back to this album over the years, because it's not easy to listen to slow songs a lot, and a lot of these are slow at the end, and it is a real different feel on the back half of the record. I started to appreciate them more as I learned the lyrics, and as I learned more about Sinead and what she went through in her whole life, and how she was tortured as a kid, and she continued to be tortured as an artist, and it never stopped, and she never stopped. So it kind of gives that weight that Jay was referring to. It gives that weight in a different way to the songs as well. So I think over time, I think I've liked this record more and more than I did even back in the day.
I think when I was listening to this, one of the things I noticed, you mentioned about the production, is that songs like Fire in Babylon or Thank You for Hearing Me, which have those, electronic beats, is like if you took her vocal out, you could put like Sade's vocal over top, and it would sound like a Sade song. But what she brings to it is her unique approach and her lyrical depth that make those songs so compelling. Fire in Babylon, I was like struck by the lyrics about, it's about her mom who was extremely abusive. And I read that her dad actually was part of like the group so divorce was not legal in Ireland, and they couldn't separate. And he became part of a group that championed divorce in Ireland so that he could get away from her because she was so abusive to her. And then eventually she ended up, because her mom made her steal from the collection plate in church. Like, this is how, like, yeah.
Wow.
And so I'm just like thinking about that and the rage that is being unleashed when she's belting it out in that song.
How about the making her live in the garden in the backyard? Did you read about that one?
Just like crazy stuff like that. And then she was
she
sent
was
to
8 years old.
She was sent to an asylum when she
Yeah.
was 15, and she had to, like, if she misbehaved, they like sent her up to where the old people just like, it was like a dark dungeon, and the old people just like shit on the floor, and she had to stay up there with them as punishment. And they were just like screaming and wailing because they were, mentally abused people probably. And this is the 1980s, and there's not a lot of healthy mental health, things happening, especially in countries which have a traditional like structure of religious asylums, where it's just like you just dump someone off in like and the nuns take care of them for the rest of their life. And the fact that she ever even like made it out of there is astounding, because like some people just never leave. They just end up in an asylum for the rest of their life. But I think the thing that saved her is that she ended up, her dad remarried after they finally got divorced, and I think he moved to Virginia and got her out of there for at least a little while. So, Jay, what doesn't work for you on the record?
Well, it sounds like you guys are into the variety a bit more than me. I'm struggling with the identity of this album. Like, I don't quite get what the mood is, what the concept is. Specifically, I don't love the electronic stuff. It feels dated to me, and it just gets in the way of her voice. I'd almost rather have tracks that are just a cappella with her than have tracks with like dated 90s bass and drum stuff. While I love the moments in Fire in Babylon, like the whole track, like I hate the bass line in that song, and I don't like the drum machine that comes into is it All Babies, which has this great like build, and then as the band comes in, I'm like, I want this to be a real band, and it's not. It's like this junky sounding drum machine, not even like a charming one. It's just like a typical 90s drum machine sound. Same thing for Thank You for Hearing Me. Like, I love that like idea for a closer. I think it really, that isolated vocal kind of pulls you in, and it has like this tiny drum sound for a while, which I think is kind of neat. You know, it creates a little bit of rhythm, but it also keeps the focus on their voice. And then as it gets builds, you know, they bring in the rest of the production, and it, to me, it starts to take away. Then there's some stuff on here where it's too I don't want to say too slow, but it's, the songs are just not quite compelling enough to deliver it too. So there's another mix of like scorn, not his simplicity, which I kind of like, but it's also right after A Perfect Indian, which I think is better, and All Babies, which I think is better. So then it just becomes like this kind of long stretch of quiet, you know, slow stuff. My Darling Child is another example of that. You know, it's only 3 minutes, but it's basically a sweet little lullaby. It's really odd to have that as the fourth song, or essentially the third song on the record. So there's some stuff on here where it's like, I'm not quite sure, like, why is that there? And production wise, are we going for something that's intimate um, and kind of haunting with these folk elements mixed in, or are we going for a trip hop record? Famine, it, to me, is just like complete nightmare. It's like her I guess I don't even know, it just, to me, it sounds like a bad hip hop production, and then she's doing like spoken vocals instead of singing. I don't want her doing spoken vocals. I want, like, please sing, like that's what you're amazing at, just let's do that. So I think there's a chunk of misses here that divert from they kind of lose the plot, which is like her voice, and her lyrics. Anything not work for you, Tim?
Yeah, I concur with you that I mean, so I like the up and down ride. I don't love the sequencing of it. I think it could be sequenced differently, and it would make much more sense the way that you're saying. Like you said, like the fact that the two fully a cappella songs, In This Heart and Tiny Grief Song, are back to back at the end of the record. It's like, put one up front, put one in the back. Like, let's more variety. Yes, the production of Fire on Babylon and Thank You for Hearing Me, and the drum part in what was it, All Babies, that it's very dated. It's the wrong thing for the rest of the record, which doesn't sound dated at all. It sounds very timeless. And when you hear that Fire on Babylon, you're like, oh, this is okay. Like, Massive Attack could have done a remix of this. Like, you know what I mean? Like, this could have easily been a trip hop track. That
There's
said,
like there's like moments on here where you're like, oh man, I feel like I'm in a church in Ireland.
yes.
And then all of a sudden it's like, wait, now I'm in a lounge in some cheesy 90s London club or something. Like,
I totally
what?
get it. Like, she's trying to like expand her palette of music, and it doesn't always work in terms of, in comparison to the rest of the record. I'd be interested to know, like, what would an entire record of Fire on Babylon and Thank You for Hearing Me, what would that sound like? Or maybe an EP or something like that. Famine is a tough one because, again, I really like the information in that song, but I don't need her to rap. And I know, I mean, she was very aware of hip hop, and I mean, like I said, she did the song with MC Light. She protested that when Public Enemy got their award, she put the logo on her head because they didn't make the award part of the ceremony. That's what she was protesting. Like, the Grammys were like, yeah, Public Enemy gets an award, but we're just going to give it to them off stage. And she's like, what? Like, hip hop's huge. Why are you not giving the hip hop artist? Oh, because you don't want the black people on stage because they're scary. Like, that's what she's protesting. And I completely get it. That said, I don't need her to do a hip hop song. Like, it just,
Yeah, like, awesome. Enjoy that. Like, but
it
you're not great at
misuses
that.
her vocal.
Yeah.
It's, or if you're going to do that, if you want to do like sort of a spoken word, just don't do it as a hip hop. Like, do it as something more organic, as opposed to this, this drum machine beat underneath. not that it's going to be soul coughing, but like what if it was more of like a beat poet type situation where you had like an upright bass, and I'm just thinking of all like the bad spoken word stuff that Eddie Vedder just done over the years, and it's like it never works. If you're not known for doing that, don't do it, because it's never going to come across the proper way. It just comes across as self-indulgent, and it kind of misses.
An American army regulation says you mustn't kill more than 10% of a nation, because to do so causes permanent psychological damage. It's not permanent, but they didn't know that. Anyway, during the supposed famine, we lost a lot more than 10% of our nation through deaths on land or in ships of emigration. But what finally broke us was not starvation, but its use in the controlling of our education. Schools go on about Black 47, on and on about the terrible famine. But what they don't say is, in truth, there really never was one. Excuse me? The lonely people. Sorry, excuse me? Where do they all come from?
I can tell you in one word.
All the lonely people.
I don't. So, like I said, I don't really have a. Most of the songs work pretty well. It's just the organization. It's just the track list. I would like it to be a little more broken up. Like the run of A Perfect Indian, Scorn, Not His Simplicity, and All Babies. Like, it's too much slow in a row. It just needed a little more. Like My Darling Child should probably be the closer. Like, make the lullaby the end closing song. So that's it's nothing that's like critical that like sinks the record, but it's just some things that I think as a listen through that would make it more enjoyable. And that's probably, Patrick, why you don't hit the second half as much as the first half, because there is a lot of stuff front loaded, like Fire in Babylon, like John I Love You. If you're thinking of this in terms of 7 songs, then My Darling Child makes sense in the first half because it is a good song. But a lot of the back half is pretty slow.
Yeah, I think the way I view it is Sinead O'Connor makes songs. She had a concept here about her mother and about mothers and about Mother Earth. The album is titled Universal Mother, and that thread runs throughout many of these songs. There's different angles that she takes on that theme, positive, negative. But yes, the My Darling Child is a lull. You're right. It does sound weird that, especially after I think those, track 2 and 3, which are the first 2 full songs, are just great right next to each other. And you got a lullaby, and then Red Football comes up. It's kind of a weird spot. You're right. That should be that's in the wrong place. And I agree with kind of some of the stuff you said about the back half. I really think Scorn, Not His Simplicity is important, real important to the record, because it's the one song that she's speaking more about a love and a person and it kind of doesn't muddle too much with the theme of the album. But I also think it's one of the better songs of those 3. That Perfect Indian is nice too. I mean, they're all nice, but that one I think is one of my favorites. But yeah, In This Heart and All Babies works more on lyrics than it does in the musical context, because the lyrics work for the album. And I think In This Heart's the opposite. We don't need that one when you just had Scorn, Not His Simplicity, and you've had even My Darling Child. So I think neither one of those really work on the record the way they were made. And then I kind of agree with you on Famine, although I listen to it with a completely different ear than if I'm listening to a hip hop song. I'm not gonna dance. I'm listening to it because of the way she's delivering it and she is she draws you in with just trying to be simple on the way she said words or speaks the words. It's not very poetic, but you could tell that it's very well organized the way she, delivers all that information. But also, if you know the line and what was her the very first record that she put out, she did a lot of this, and it's very 80s. And that was kind of her signature before Nothing Compares to You, was how she could incorporate this, at the time, more of a, 1986, 87, there, hip hop was in its infancy. So she incorporated hip hop into that record. And I think this was like an attempt to say, listening through this record, you went through 10 songs and you're like, well, this is completely different Sinead. And then she delivers this one. I think it's an attempt to say, I'm she's still here doing what she used to do, also updated version, and I think it's kind of a miss musically. I mean, sonically, like you said, I don't think it really holds up very well, and it doesn't fit on the record. That could easily be replaced with the song from In the Name of the Father. Put that song on there. That song would work perfectly on this record. And drop Famine. We can get to this later, but I agree with you on that part of it. But yeah, when you said it sounds like you're in a church, she's singing like a hymnal. She's
Yeah.
drawing from her inspiration, which is the church, and she's drawing from her Irish folk influences. So those kind of things are intriguing to me. I mean, when it comes down to like analyzing it, whether it should be or makes me feel one way or another, I don't know, but it sparks my intellectual side as much as it does some of the other songs do emotionally and lyrically. So I that's where I approve of anybody doing things that are very authentic, and she authentically pulled in hymnal sounds into her record, and you just don't get that every day. So I mean, unless you're Kanye West, I guess.
The name of the song from In the Name of the Father is You Made Me the Thief of Your Heart.
Yeah. Big
That's
song.
her second. I was looking this up because I wanted to know what the name of the song was. That was her second soundtrack contribution. Her first one was to the Married to the Mob soundtrack, starring Michelle Pfeiffer and Matthew Modine.
Forgot about that one.
From 1988. I have not watched Married to the Mob in quite some time. I need to revisit that movie and see if it holds up. That was called Jump in the River.
I don't know if I remember that one. She did her third album was, like jazz standards and a few originals in the style of singing jazz, old standards. So I think a little bit of that creeps into this record, I think, as a continuity of her career as well. But not so much as some of the other albums, I think that creeps into. But I think it just kind of, though, all those things kind of refer back to her body of work as much as they do in this record. So I think maybe it's a detriment only to this record, but in the grand scheme of things, I don't feel that as a big negative.
I just want to point out on that song or on that album that you're mentioning, the one with the jazz covers, jazz standards, Am I Not Your Girl? There are 17 violin players on that record. Like it is all jazz instruments. Like I don't see electric guitar anywhere or drum programming or anything like that. Like French horn, tin whistle, flugelhorn. I'm actually interested to check that out because she has such an amazing voice. I'd actually like to hear, like she does a cover of Don't Cry for Me, Argentina, which Madonna obviously made famous because of the Evita movie, but I'd like to hear Sinead's version of that.
Yeah, I don't think she was very young then. Her first record she did when she was 20.
Mm-hmm.
So that one she would have been 23 or something or 24 when that came out. And I don't know that was the right time for her in her career to do that. But as far as like getting it right, because it just feels like some of those songs, they're not better versions than what you've heard before sometimes. But I, it, again, it points to her though, because she was a punk. I mean, she wasn't a punk. She took the punk of rebelling against what was
Mm-hmm.
wrong that she saw in the world. And she, like that first record, she almost didn't make it because the record label wanted her to end her pregnancy because she got pregnant during the recording of the album. And she was like, that's when she shaved her head and said, I'm having this baby. And they redid the record completely. She scrapped the entire record, redid it. And then she came back with that Standards record a few years later, kind of in the same way. It's like, I can do, screw you guys. Don't tell me what to do. That's what she's done her whole life because she's been, had to stand up to abuse her whole life. And so I can, again, I who said it on Discord, Ian, I think, said it, you just can't deny what she was doing because she was doing it out of her complete soul,
Mm-hmm.
and she never stopped doing that part of it. Now it got messy. She had a lot of, obviously mental issues throughout the
Mm-hmm.
years, but it all stems from the same thing. And I just find it inspiring because she just never stopped. And she always, in my mind, she almost always said the right things, did the right things, and she got scorned for it. Child abuse is wrong, misogyny is wrong, mansplaining is wrong, one person controlling another person is wrong. She sang War by Bob Marley because everything in that song is saying what's wrong with the world. And she did it twice. She did it at the Bob Dylan anniversary show,
Mm-hmm.
Unplanned. If that's actually part of the documentary, if you watch the documentary on Sinead. I haven't read the book yet, but I'm looking forward to reading her uh, autobiography. But yeah, it's just very inspiring. I just think you just can't deny what she's doing because she's doing it
I guess I
correctly
didn't
for herself.
realize that she was considered pop. Like when I heard Nothing Compares to You, I thought of her as like someone who snuck into pop music through this ballad that was, undeniably great. But like, I didn't realize that her sound essentially was, you look up the first record and it's like pop rock, experimental pop, art rock. Um, I did not know that was the sound. So when I heard Fire in Babylon to kick off the record, I was like, oh wait, this is what? Like I'm expecting the balladress, the ballads of and the big voice, which we get there, but I was thinking it was gonna be more folky, more traditional. So to hear like a 90s produced song, it was both good and confusing the first time I listened to it. I do need to correct myself. Married to the Mob was not the first soundtrack she was on. A Nightmare on Elm Street 4, The Dream Master, features the
Oh,
song
man.
I Want Your Hands on Me, which is on the first record.
Not to be confused with the Dream
Dokken.
Warrior.
Not confused with Dokken and the Dream Warriors. Is that Nightmare on Elm Street 2?
3.
Or
Three.
3?
3, yeah.
Okay. The Dream Master is 4. The Dream Warriors is 3. Oh my goodness. And people complain about sequels now. Like,
Right,
there's
right,
so many of
right.
this. Like, there's 4 Nightmare on Elm Street movies from the 80s. Are you kidding me?
Yeah, there's very little that we complain about right now that hasn't been happened in the past already or been much worse in the past.
Right. So we talked about this record in terms of it being sort of the opportunity for her to break free of what she was doing as far as, I guess, pop, and do her own thing throughout the entire record. And in terms of charting, this made it to 36 in the US. I Do Not Want What I Have Not Got. What I Haven't Got was a number one album, which I did not realize that made it to number one. Lion and the Cobra was 36. Am I Not Your Girl is 27. Like Lion and the Cobra, it was gold in the US. So I'm surprised that it's considered sort of a failure. Not a failure, but I guess just, disappointing in terms of sales. Maybe it's because you're following up, not immediately, but you have that massive number one album and single 4 years earlier. And then you go and do a jazz record, a jazz standards record. That's a pretty big, that's like if Guns N' Roses after Appetite for Destruction was like, or, it was like, we're going to do all, no, that came after Use Your Illusion. That's right. It's just such a weird career. And I guess that makes sense for her. She's an iconoclast. Is that the right way I'm using that word? Like, you have to expect her to swerve almost every time. And she does.
I think at that time, she was probably might have been still at the height of her popularity, because she had done so many other things, collaborated with other artists. She was also on that Afro Celt Sound System record, which was a really cool song.
Oh, she is? Oh, okay.
I think it was number 2, their second album. And so she was guest vocalist on a lot of things. And then she's, participated in Lilith Fair, Lilith Fair was, I think it was the second time we had seen her live. But it became, you talk about her vocals, and we had a lot of lovely vocals from females in the 90s that we talk about all the time, like Dolores from the Cranberries. And I saw Natalie Merchant, and I thought, man, I didn't know how good of a vocalist she was, until I saw her live. But after, I think we saw the Cranberries twice, and then it wasn't until we saw Sinead O'Connor where I was like, oh my gosh, this is a new level, she trounced everyone else that we had ever heard before, especially live. So I do remember seeing her at Lilith Fair, and it was kind of like, this is the freaking Sinead O'Connor show here, everybody else could take a break, really. But I think that was 95. So I think it was still around that, Lilith Fair was just getting going then. So there was a lot of momentum for female artists at that time, that she kind of spearheaded a lot of that as far as pushing her way to the front. But yeah, I don't think the songs got played on the radio very much. I think people bought the record off the bat because of her popularity,
Right. Well, none of the singles charted in the US for this album.
Yeah, that makes sense.
That makes sense. She did chart in like UK, New Zealand, Netherlands, Australia, but yeah, it didn't connect with US audiences, which also she had a public persona that people were smashing her records. So I'm sure that part of it was like, oh, that woman, the one who hates the Pope, like, you know what I mean? Like people come up with reasons to not want to be, supportive.
You hate Andrew Dice Clay?
He's a generational talent. Hey. Okay. Let's leave the Andrew Dice Clay impersonations and work on our final ratings for this album.
Thank you for holding
I'll share the poll results from Patreon in just a moment. But Jay, where do you land? Worthy album, better EP, or decent single?
I land at an EP that would be pretty somber, I think. The stuff I highlighted is a little bit more, I guess, a little darker, minor sounding, simple, maybe even more of the folk influence coming through or roots. So I have John, I Love You, Red Football, A Perfect Indian, All Babies, In This Heart, and Tiny Grief Song, which I think would be pretty cohesive. So that's where I landed. What about you, Tim?
So I agree with you on all those songs. I do like Fire on Babylon and Thank You for Hearing Me. Just her vocal performances are so good. I wish there was a way I could split this into two EPs, like an electronic EP and like a more stripped down EP, but there's not enough electronic stuff. So maybe it's like an EP plus a extra bonus 7-inch with Fire on Babylon and Thank You for Hearing Me as the bonus 7-inch. Or a 12-inch remix. That makes more sense. A 12-inch remix bonus. So I guess I'm at a 70s album because I'm probably at like 7 or 8 songs. The ones that you mentioned plus the other two. So I guess I'm at 70s album, which is essentially a long EP or a very short album. Patrick.
I'm basically the same as you, Tim. I would say that Famine should have been a bonus song on a single or its own thing.
Yeah.
You know, I mentioned before, I think All Babies in This Heart, they don't really fit on the record on both sides of where it should be lyrically and sonically. So it's kind of awkward. So I don't know if you can cut them because I'd still like the songs, but they're awkward there. And definitely, like you said, the sequencing is not great. I think somebody should have been better at that part of it, like organizing the songs, but you can't tell Sinead O'Connor you're going to cut a song off of record. I'm pretty sure of that. Because then she'll just put it on twice or something. So I'm probably at a 70s album. I do like the baby. Am I a Human? I think that's great in there. Just sparks of what the album theme is. So I would not leave that 24-second track off. Jermaine is nice because it that's really what she is. She's speaking her mind. She's using that sample as a precursor to the record. But yeah, so maybe could lose All Babies in This Heart and put them on a different album, but then bring in the song from In the Name of the Father, You Make Me the Thief of Your Heart is such a great song. That should be on here, and the album would be better for it if it were. So go listen to that song if you haven't. It's a good one.
Sounds good. Yeah, I'm going to. I do want to check out some of the other stuff, at least sample the first record, because really, again, I only know like one song off of that. I know like one song off the second record. I don't know anything off the third record, and I've never listened to anything other than the Nightmare on Elm Street track. Maybe,
but and listeners should listen to Famine too, because there's some information in there you might want to
no, it is. I was like, oh my god, history is a lie. Like,
yeah, and
this is so wild.
And that's like the theme of her existence is history is a lie. That's
Right.
why she turned Muslim, which is we never really got to, but she started reading the Quran and she realized that her interpretation was this religion is to replace all religions, but to respect all the other religions. Just the parts that are wrong are bad. And so she knows that everything's flawed and thought that, well, Islam understands me. Everything that came before it was flawed. And so that's why At least that was her reasoning for becoming Muslim late in her life.
I will say this, her Wikipedia is quite extensive. And the one thing that I found interesting is when Miley Cyrus released the single Wrecking Ball. I don't know if you remember that song, but she's in the video actually like mimics Nothing Compares to You in parts of the video. And that's the also when she's like naked riding a wrecking ball.
Yeah.
And Sinead O'Connor, obviously, because she mimicked what she was doing in the video, she made a comment like, look, you know, you're a young woman, don't let people take advantage of you, you know, and basically exploit your sexuality. You know, you need to respect yourself as an artist and that kind of stuff. And Miley Cyrus like clapped back at her and was like really nasty. It was like, I'm not hearing that. I'll be hosting SNL this weekend. And I'm like, wow, that was really, I mean, I get it. You're young and you're making a ton of money and you've been Hannah Montana and stuff like that. But like, she's giving you good advice. The music industry is terrible when it comes to women and abuse and exploiting, you know, them for decades. So like, maybe listen to someone who's been through it and don't just, you know, not even just ignore them, but like mocked them on social media.
Yeah, but that was like also the typical of Sinead's career too. She says it, she puts it out there. It's either scorned or she's scorned for it, or it's ignored in this case. But it's out there, you know, it's really Miley's problem that she isn't listening to her. It's not anybody else that might be affected by what she says, you know, because she's saying the right thing to the right person. Just that person didn't want to listen at the time. And maybe Miley will be the one that turns around later and says,
well,
you know,
she did when Sinead O'Connor died. Miley Cyrus said Sinead was right. Like, I should have listened to her, essentially.
Yeah.
But she waited until she was, you know, dead to say that. So I don't really, that kind of pissed me off when I read that. You know what didn't piss me off is the results of the poll on Patreon. 60% were the album, 30% better EP, 10% decent single. That's kind of where we're at. You know, Jay was at a better EP. I was sort of in between EP and album, and you're right there with me. So yeah, I can understand that. And I can understand like if you are not into this style of music, that it might turn you off. Because it's intense. That's the thing. This is not like listening to, you know, I'm trying to think of something that was not intense in the 90s. It's not listening to like
Chumbawamba?
Cake.
Or Cake, yeah.
Or Cake. That would be the other one I could think of. I'm trying to think of goofy bands from the 90s. Cake and Bloodhound Gang, I guess. So if you're really into the Bloodhound Gang, you're probably not going to like this record. I'm sorry. That's the Bloodhound Gang community should probably avoid this. But based on our comments and based on the votes, we think you should, you know, definitely check it out. There's some really fantastic vocal performances that will make your eyes go wide when you hear how incredible her voice is. So thank you, Patrick. And I agree. You said you wanted to bring something that somebody that needed to be exposed to our audience that, you know, is a big part of the 90s, and Sinead definitely was. So
yeah, she was one of those, and a lot of people might look at her as an 80s artist because she started in the 80s, but she embodied what became the 90s, just like somebody like Chuck D. I think that's a good comparison. Like he put out there what he was supposed to put out there, and in the 90s, that's kind of what everybody wanted to do, is like dig deeper inside their soul and put art to it, you know. Whereas the 80s was a lot more about, you know, partying and finding a new way to party and jumping up and down.
And she ended up having one of her songs remixed by the Bomb Squad, which was the Public
Enemy.
Enemy.
Did she?
Yeah. So it seems very appropriate that they would have a connection.
Yeah.
There's
Well,
a spiritual connection there.
Sinead O'Connor. And
yes,
I threw this up here for R.I.P. to Steven Musinski, because I know you guys did a great tribute to him when he passed away, and I actually have one of these t-shirts on order, just hasn't come yet. I would have worn it tonight, so I'm throwing a picture of the t-shirt up in his honor. R.I.P. to Stephen John. I just had a minuscule friendship with him online, but it feels like I knew him for years, and like we had a good connection. So I just want to throw that out there too. I appreciate you guys because
Nice.
you guys connected us. So, and there you go.
Well,
That's how great this community is, man.
Yeah, I appreciate you saying
That is
that.
pretty cool.
I do. That comes up often when we're on the Discord and you're waiting for somebody's to pop in with a comment. And I think somebody said it the other day. They were like, I don't, was it you or somebody else was like, I keep waiting for that Steven comment to come up, and sad when it doesn't.
Right.
That's where you can go, dmounion.com or Dig Me Out Union. You get the vote in the polls like the ones for this episode, our monthly tournaments where we take albums suggested through digmeoutpodcast.com and we do a poll on them. That's both for the 90s rock podcast and our newly launched 80s metal podcast, which comes out every 2 weeks. By the time this episode airs, we will have just launched our episode on the much beloved and Chip Midnight suggested Salty Dog, and with a Columbus connection to Columbus,
Yeah,
Ohio,
Chip had some great stories.
Great stories, some of which
that.
couldn't even make the air because they were so great. Let's just
Some
put it that
do.
way. So many do. We're not withholding anything that anybody would find overly interested or interesting. We share all the interesting stuff, just some weird Columbus details we had to leave out because who cares? It's Columbus. I mean,
Right.
Yeah.
we don't need to get that specific. But digmeoutpodcast.com is where you can go to suggest albums for both. You can also sign up for the newsletter. You get, for each of the bands suggested for our polls, you get a history of the band. You get a weekly release calendar of new releases of 80s, 90s, and aughts relevant music, TV shows, movies, books, etc. Plus, occasionally, someone from our Patreon community submits reviews. Ian McIver just submitted a couple of reviews just last week or a week ago or 2 weeks ago. And it's fun to get the patrons' feedback on new releases. I think there was the new Ministry album and one other album that came out recently. There's a lot of stuff in the last couple of weeks that came out. It was like 8 or 9 albums a week.
Yes. It's been a busy year.
It has.
I mean,
Well,
it
that
really
Ministry
died
album
off
got-
at the end. It really died off at the end of last year. So
Oh yeah.
it was getting pretty thin there for a solid month or so.
The end of fourth quarter, beginning of first quarter was dead. There was like nothing coming out. It was all compilations and live albums if you could find anything. And then like the third week of January was like, here's 10 albums that are all relevant to you. And it's just going to keep like going like that for the next couple of months. Because that, like, the Ministry album was supposed to come out last fall. It got pushed back. Other albums have been pushed back a little bit. So I'm guessing that's because of like vinyl pressing is getting messed with again because Taylor Swift has a new album ramping up. So I'm sure that all the plants around the world are only doing Taylor
Are you
Swift
breaking
albums.
this news?
That's what happens. It's whenever a major artist has a record coming out, it screws up all the presses because they all take that as the big order.
Right.
And but I don't know. Maybe Uncle Al was messing with the record a little bit more and he wanted to add 17 more guitars onto a track. And that's why the album had to be pushed back. Who knows? Anyway, box newsletter, you sign up for it, digmeoutpodcast.com. That's our Substack. Finally, Apple Podcasts is where you go to leave positive feedback for this show. So for Jay, I'm Tim. We're out, and we'll be back next week with another episode of Dig Me Out.
La 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 la.